Check out these amazing space news stories from this week. I hope you enjoy this edit. Don't forget you can catch each of these stories in a daily short on YouTube, and please consider subscribing and sharing this content if you enjoy it. NASA successfully launches 2 new space telescopes, and JWST spots a puzzle. A Falcon 9 rocket successfully launched NASA's new SPHEREX and Punch missions into orbit last night after several aborted attempts at the launch. SPHEREX will gather spectral data on 450 million external galaxies and 100 million stars in our own Milky Way in order to study the origins of the universe. Punch is a constellation of 4 small satellites that will study the outer atmosphere of the Sun, called the coronosphere, and the solar wind, and how these affect Earth and the rest of the solar system. Both the SPHEREX and Punch missions are scheduled to last at least 2 years. In other news, scientists have used the James Webb Space Telescope Advanced Deep Galactic Survey, or JADES, data to discover that about 2/3 of the 263 galaxies in the field, where they could measure the rotation, were rotating in the same direction. If the universe was random in some sense, then we'd expect half the galaxies to rotate one way and half to rotate the other. It's possible the preferential rotation was caused because the universe was born rotating, which would mean our standard model of cosmology is missing some details. It's also possible this particular sample is biased for various reasons. More research is needed to figure out what's going on, but it's a super interesting result that was published in the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society last month. Did you know there's a total lunar eclipse tonight? The total eclipse will be visible across most of North and South America, Western Europe, and parts of Africa, with a partial eclipse visible over a much broader region. The start of the eclipse will be at 8:57 p.m. Pacific, and it will finally end at 3 a.m. Totality, which is probably what most people think of when they think eclipse, will last a little over an hour and starts at 11:26 p.m. Pacific and ends at 12:31 a.m. Pacific. Unlike a solar eclipse, you don't need any special equipment to view a lunar eclipse, and it makes a great photo opportunity. Go with a wide-angle lens for a cool landscape composition, or a telephoto lens for a nice close-up. Get even more creative and find a way to get yourself or your friends in the shot too. The moon is such a bright target that you won't need particularly long exposure times, but I would recommend a sturdy tripod and, if possible, some kind of remote trigger so you don't have to touch the camera to take a photo. If you don't have a remote trigger, you can use the timer on your camera so that it stops shaking from the shutter press before the picture is taken. All that being said, I bet you can get some epic social media worthy results with your cell phone too. However you decide to enjoy the eclipse tonight, I hope you have clear skies and end up with some great memories. Did you know that climate change will affect the number of satellites that can sustainably operate in low Earth orbit? This surprising result comes from a new study by engineers at MIT. The emission of greenhouse gases causes the upper atmosphere to shrink, and in particular a region called the thermosphere. The thermosphere is the part of space where most satellites operate and extends from about 80 kilometers to 600 kilometers above the Earth. As the thermosphere shrinks, atmospheric drag on satellites at a given altitude is reduced. You might be thinking that's great for satellites, but the downside is that old satellites and debris also feel less drag, meaning they do not get pulled down to lower altitudes where they can burn up. The result? The thermosphere can get crowded with space junk, making it almost impossible for satellites to operate without a collision. Simulations carried out by the MIT group show that by the year 2100, the carrying capacity of parts of the thermosphere could be reduced by as much as 66%. Just in case you're thinking that's a problem for future us, the study found that there are some regions of the thermosphere that are already crowded with satellites and close to full capacity, such as those inhabited by the megaconstellations. By capacity, we're talking about a particular orbital shell being so crowded that any collision would lead to a cascade of further collisions, wiping out most of the satellites in that shell and creating so much debris that the region of low Earth orbit becomes completely unusable. As William Parker, one of the study's authors, said, "We rely on the atmosphere to clean up our debris, and if the atmosphere is changing, then the debris environment is changing too." The research is published in Nature Sustainability and is open access. Here's a few new space and astronomy stories for today's video. Links to all of them are in the description. Nearby supernovae could have been responsible for at least 2 mass extinction events in Earth's distant past, according to a new paper in the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society. The Devonian extinction happened 372 million years ago and killed 60% of marine invertebrates, and the Ordovician extinction was 445 million years ago and wiped out around 70% of all species. Astronomers have been able to establish a link between the rate of nearby supernova and the time between these extinction events. ESA's Hera mission is on its way to investigate an asteroid collision, but stopped by Mars on the way and snapped some rare pictures of the small moon Deimos. Deimos is much smaller and less well known than Mars's other moon, Phobos. You can watch another attempt to send Crew 10 astronauts up to the ISS tonight. Launch is set for 4:03 p.m. Pacific and will be carried live on NASA Plus. Finally, there's some epic video of the Blue Ghost lander touching down on the lunar surface over at the NASA website.